Thanks for staying with NDTV. You're watching The World Report, and I am Arjun Samar Mahendran. Now, top story this Wednesday, viewers. Now, as the West Asia war keeps on simmering, here are 20 simulations. That's correct. We've fleshed out 20 simulations of the possible worst-case scenarios. It's a look at how fast, if indeed things could unravel in the West Asia. On your screens right now, first up, the first scenario we fleshed out for you. What if Israel launches a second wave on Iran's nuclear Fordow site? Now, not only will this lead to contamination in the area, but also an all-out nuclear escalation between the two warring sides. Now, on to the second scenario that we fleshed out from you. Iran fires ballistic missiles at Tel Aviv. Now, this will ignite fears of an all-out war again across West Asia if that comes to fruition, viewers. Now, the third scenario we have mapped out for you here. What happens if Hezbollah opens a full front in North Israel? We already know Israel has been and currently is also fighting a multi-front war. This will essentially open another front, which the Israeli Defense Forces will virtually have to protect. Moving on to the fourth scenario that we fleshed out for you. Israel bombs IRGC bases in Damascus. Now, well, if this happens, Syria will in fact also be pulled in to the conflict, expanding the battlefield beyond just Iran and Israel. Over to the fifth scenario now. US Navy destroys Iranian radars in Hormuz. The Strait of Hormuz, if US Navy takes out key Iranian radar systems, asserting dominance in the Gulf. And who will do that? The US Navy's CENTCOM is in charge of missions in the Middle East. On to the next scenario, the scenario number 6. Iran attacks US bases in UAE and Iraq. A no-brainer here. If Iran does so, not only will the US, but other Middle Eastern countries will also be dragged into this conflict further and further, only exaggerating it. On to the next scenario now we have fleshed out for you. Saudi and Emirati defense systems go active. In case of this happening, you have to prepare for incoming fire, not only from Israel, but also from the United States. The next scenario we have for you up on our screens right now. If Israel strikes Iranian missile silos with F-35. Remember, these F-35s made in the US also need US permission to engage these fighter jets, the 5th-gen fighter jets, in combat. And it'll be a preemptive limit to the retaliation, in fact. The next escalation scenario. Now, what happens if China moves warships into the Strait of Hormuz? As I pointed out earlier, the CENTCOM, the US CENTCOM fleet is responsible for the Middle East. Now, if this happens, if China were to in fact move warships into the Strait of Hormuz, it would lead to a direct conflict between Washington and Beijing. On to our 10th scenario now. From China, we move to Russia. Russia threatens NATO if intervention escalates. We've all seen the close relationship that Moscow and Tehran share. In fact, Moscow has been using Iranian drones to target Ukraine and considers Iran one of its closest strategic allies. On to the 11th scenario we fleshed out for you. Iran launches massive drone swarms on Israeli airfields. Now, Israel has, or so it claims, to have neutralized around 1/3 or more than 60% of Iran's air defenses. And in a scenario where Iran is actually able to take out some Israeli fighter jets or even damage their airfields, that will be a big problem for Israel, because right now Israel virtually controls the Iranian skies. Moving on to the 12th scenario we have for you. Israel conducts decapitation strike on Iranian leadership. Glimpses of what we've already seen. The head of the IRGC was eliminated on Friday, followed by the new IRGC chief being eliminated on Tuesday. Moving on to the 13th scenario we have for you. Iran declares national war footing and closure of the Strait of Hormuz. Of course, this will lead to a massive economic fallout, because the Strait of Hormuz is it's a very international shipping route for international containers and, of course, for global northwest trade. Now, the 14th scenario, US launches a full-scale air campaign from aircraft carriers. Again, the CENTCOM will be very pivotal here because US has a barrage or a big amount or a large amount of fighter jets positioned in the Middle East in its CENTCOM fleet. Moving on to escalation number 15. Israel hints at nuclear options under the Samson doctrine. So this would perhaps be one of the biggest escalations where Israel announces that it is going to press the nuclear red button, and this will in fact not only escalate. Escalation 6 now is Iran test fires long-range ballistic missiles in show of strength. So we already know that Iran has claimed that its missiles can not only reach Israel but can also in fact target other European countries that are farther away, pulling European Union into the conflict as well. Escalation 17 we have for you next. Now, Russia deploys nuclear strategic bombers to Syria. We mentioned how Syria could in fact be pulled into the war, and Syria, being a close ally of Russia, might even let Moscow and Putin deploy some of his bombers in its airfield, again leading to an all-out conflict. Scenario 18, Israel uses low-yield nuclear device on military targets in Iran. Now again, any use of a military asset or a warhead by Israel will of course escalate the conflict beyond just the region, beyond just the two countries. There's a lot of Arab countries also in the middle which will get embroiled in this conflict. Scenario 19, Iran retaliates with a dirty bomb via proxy in Tel Aviv. So after the October 7 attacks, we've been seeing how the Iranian leadership has been actively, in fact, sponsoring the Hezbollahs, the Houthis in Yemen, and also the Hamas in Gaza. So through one of its proxies, if it's able to smuggle a dirty bomb into Tel Aviv or Israel, that will lead to an unprecedented conflict. And finally, the 20th scenario we have for you here, global markets crash as United Nations declares a catastrophic alert. Now, this can happen in a situation where the Strait of Hormuz, as we discussed, is blocked by Iran, or there's, of course, the conflict spreads to the ocean as well. Now, this was an example of how fast actually this conflict could spiral. In fact, viewers, you should share this simulation to remind the world peace is not a choice until it's not. Now, moving on, India has never asked for and will never accept a third-party mediation to resolve the issue of Pakistan's illegal occupation of parts of Jammu and Kashmir. Now, this was the highlight of PM Narendra Modi's late Tuesday phone conversation with US President Donald Trump. In fact, Foreign Secretary Vikram Misri briefed the press Wednesday morning about that 35-minute phone call which took place while Mr. Modi was actually in Canada, in fact, to attend the G7 summit. He said the topic came after Mr. Trump asked PM Modi for details, in fact, about Operation Sindoor. The PM, meanwhile, told Mr. Trump India's response had been measured and targeted only terror camps in Pakistan and Pakistan-occupied Kashmir as well. The PM then also underlined India's position on third-party mediation, that it is neither wanted nor needed, and that this has always been the case. Listen in.
10 मई की रात को पाकिस्तान के हमले का भारत ने बहुत सशक्त जवाब दिया और पाकिस्तान की सेना को बहुत नुकसान पहुंचाया। उसके मिलिट्री एयर बेसिस को इनऑपरेबल बना दिया। भारत के मुंहतोड़ जवाब के कारण पाकिस्तान को भारत से सैन्य कार्रवाई रोकने का आग्रह करना पड़ा। प्रधानमंत्री मोदी ने राष्ट्रपति ट्रंप को स्पष्ट रूप से कहा कि इस पूरे घटनाक्रम के दौरान कभी भी किसी भी स्तर पर भारत अमेरिका ट्रेड डील या अमेरिका द्वारा भारत और पाकिस्तान के बीच मध्यस्थता जैसे विषयों पर बात नहीं हुई थी। सैन्य कार्रवाई रोकने की बात सीधे भारत और पाकिस्तान के बीच दोनों सेनाओं की एग्जिस्टिंग चैनल्स के माध्यम से हुई थी और पाकिस्तान के ही आग्रह पर हुई थी। प्रधानमंत्री मोदी ने जोर देकर कहा कि भारत ने न तो कभी मध्यस्थता स्वीकार की थी, न करता है और न ही कभी करेगा।
Well, that was the Foreign Secretary, Vikram Misri. My colleague, meanwhile, Shiv Arur, gets you more on the story.
This conversation is interesting on so many levels, and there's a lot to unpack when two leaders like Modi and Trump speak for 35 minutes. Imagine how long that conversation actually is. Number one, of course, the context was set. The fact that it was a phone call and not a face-to-face meeting because Trump had to abruptly leave the G7 in light of what's happening between Iran and Israel. The fact that this is the first conversation really after Operation Sindoor. The fact that Prime Minister Modi, the big takeaway, of course, is, setting the record straight, clearing any doubts about, the suggestion that there was mediation from the US president's side and that there was absolutely no talk of any trade or any deal or any bargaining chips diplomatically or otherwise during Operation Sindoor is something that the Prime Minister has cleared the decks on, settled the debate on, literally in a conversation with the man who made those claims, the US president himself. So it's very interesting, to see what the next steps in that conversation will actually be. I find it interesting that President Trump, moving away from protocol as he usually does. That is brand Trump, after all, quipping and inviting Prime Minister Modi to stop by in the United States, on his return from the G7. Obviously, that doesn't happen on a dime. The Prime Minister of India is the Prime Minister of the world's largest democracy. He's busy. He's got a busy schedule as well. He can't suddenly divert his travel plans to stop over in the United States, no matter how important that relationship is. And it is a very important relationship, but he's got other work to do. But I think what this does really, Gauri, is set the stage for that next step. I think what the Prime Minister has done in these 35 minutes is clear the air over any lingering doubts over Trump and the United States administration's role in Operation Sindoor and how what happened was a ceasefire that was forced literally only by Indian action and not because of any external mediation. That's the big takeaway from this.
Well, PM Modi has sent a clear message, in fact, during his 23-hour trip to the leaders of the G7. He's hit out at support for terrorism, international support for terrorism, which is in fact coming in from countries like Turkey, as we have seen in the recent past. He's also said, going forward, terrorism is an enemy of humanity. It's one thing that India as a country has been reiterating for decades together now. He added that no country should support terrorism and also gave out a stark warning that terror support will in fact come at a price that any country is not willing to pay. Meanwhile, there were also progress made in the strained India-Canada relations at the sidelines of the G7 summit. There you see the iconic handshake between PM Modi and Canada's Mark Carney. And for reference, this was PM Modi's first visit to Canada in 10 years. That's right, after 2015. Now listen in to what both the leaders had to say.
भारत और कनाडा के संबंध अनेक प्रकार से बहुत ही महत्वपूर्ण है। कनाडा की अनेक कंपनियों का भारत में निवेश है। भारत के लोगों का भी कनाडा की धरती पर बहुत बड़ा निवेश है। लोकतांत्रिक मूल्यों को समर्पित कनाडा और भारत मिलकर के लोकतंत्र को मजबूत करना होगा, मानवता को मजबूत करना होगा, हमारे रिसोर्सेज का ऑप्टिमम यूटिलाइजेशन कर करके मानव जात के कल्याण के काम में कैसे ला सकते हैं, उस दिशा में हम प्रयास करते रहेंगे। और मुझे विश्वास है कि प्रधानमंत्री जी के चुनाव के बाद मुझे पहली बार मिलने का मौका मिला है, तो इस चुनाव के भव्य विजय के लिए भी मैं उनको बधाई देता हूं और आने वाले कालखंड में उनके साथ भारत और कनाडा मिलकर के अनेक क्षेत्रों में प्रगति करेंगे।
We have mutual interests in security, border security, and military security, and in commercial prosperity, and we have a variety of paths of those discussions. The Government of Canada is going to agree only to those things that are fundamentally in the interest of Canada. In many cases, there's alignment with the United States, but not all. And the discussions are continuing. They're productive discussions, but they have more to go. And as I say, they'll take all the time that's necessary, but no more.
After 2 years of diplomatic friction between India and Canada, both sides have decided now to appoint new high commissioners in each other's country. In a 40-minute-long bilateral meeting that took place between Prime Minister Modi and Prime Minister Mark Carney of Canada in Kananaskis on the sidelines of the G7 summit, this was the big decision that was made by the two sides. Prime Minister Mark Carney saying that this would form a foundation for the reset in the ties between the two countries. Prime Minister Modi also acknowledging the importance of India-Canada relationship. He said that Canadian companies had invested in India, Indians had invested in Canada, and thereby underlining the trade relationship also between the two sides. Both sides underlined democracy and democratic values as a basis of dealing with each other, as well as rules-based order. They spoke about issues like energy security, artificial intelligence and energy, apart from other bilateral issues that both sides believe would help restore a normalcy in their relationship. In Kananaskis, this is Maha Siddiqui for NDTV.
Meanwhile, across the southern border in Washington, President Donald Trump will meet Pakistan Army's Chief General Syed Asif Munir, who is in fact in Washington currently on an official visit, on a so-called official visit, Islamabad claims. Now, the reports about the meeting come days after the White House denied inviting Munir to the U.S. Army's 250th anniversary celebrations on the 14th of June. The Pakistani military leader will meet the U.S. leader for lunch in the White House's cabinet room. This is according to the president's daily public schedule. Now, the timing of this meeting is critical as it comes during an escalating high-stakes conflict between Israel and Iran. Munir is also meanwhile expected to meet with Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth on his U.S. trip. This is according to a report by Pakistani daily Dawn. And very interestingly, this visit also comes just a day after the general addressed the so-called Pakistan diaspora in Washington amid protests which had in fact broken out right outside the Four Seasons venue inside which he was giving this address. My colleague Vishal Vivek gets us more details.
On one hand, we have the US President. On the other, we have the Field Marshal, so-called Field Marshal Asif Munir. This will happen. This will be a closed-door lunch at the White House, is what we've heard. And this comes, in the wake of the big clash between India and Pakistan. And during this meet, there's a possibility that US action on Iran could also be discussed, because there have been several reports that suggest that US is almost ready to act on Iran. And the fact of the matter is, when US does decide to attack Iran, it will need the bases that Pak has. Pak has been a long-time ally of US, so that will be in concentration. That is what the US will be looking at. And Trump is what the reports are suggesting, that Trump is now trying to appease Pak because the Iran war seems to be deepening each day. So that is what will also be looked at. And as we've been talking about, the meet comes shortly after the Operation Sindoor, in which Pak was exposed on the world stage. So it will also be in consideration when experts look at this meeting with close eye. And Trump has been repeatedly claiming that he was involved in brokering that ceasefire. The PM just now spoke with Trump and made it clear that that's not the case. It was Pakistan that had approached India for a ceasefire.
Now, the deadly conflict between Iran and Israel enters its sixth day, with both sides widening their attacks. Iran's Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei has issued a battle cry, this as Tehran used hypersonic missiles to pound Israel in the latest round of overnight strikes. The 10th round, for perspective there, Iranian leader warns of no mercy will be shown. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, meanwhile, has said he believes the Jewish state's offensive have significantly set back Tehran's nuclear program, sending them back a very, very long time. That's Netanyahu's statement. Now, in a series of threatening posts on Truth Social, US President Donald Trump has said that for now he would not act to eliminate Ayatollah Khamenei and that the US could very well assassinate him, but is refraining from doing so. Now, the only reason they are choosing not to do so, according to Trump, is to avoid any retaliation against American civilians and troops in the Middle East. Now, he also demanded for an unconditional surrender. As we have already flashed earlier, we know exactly where the so-called supreme leader is hiding, said Trump's tweet on social media. He's an easy target, but it is safe there. We are not going to take him out. At least not for now, Trump wrote on his Truth Social account. Here's more.
Ahead of this meeting in the White House Situation Room, President Trump fired off a slew of highly charged social media posts, giving the clearest indication yet of how he views this situation and what he wants. The president called for Iran's unconditional surrender, saying that the U.S. has complete and total control of the skies over the country. He also said the U.S. knows exactly where Iran's supreme leader is hiding, and that for now the U.S. isn't going to kill him. But the president added that his patience is wearing thin. As with everything with Trump, it's really hard to know if this is really how he feels or if this is just a negotiating tactic. But fears are mounting that this situation could very easily go off the rails. The president has said that he is not interested in a ceasefire, but a real end to the hostilities and an end to Iran's nuclear program. But to really end it, to really end the nuclear program, it would likely mean the U.S. getting directly involved. It has the military hardware, the precision-guided bombs and aircraft to hit Iran's enrichment plant, which is buried very deep in a mountain. Now, Israel believes the U.S. will help in this endeavor, although Trump has not confirmed this. But his vice president, J.D. Vance, perhaps has now set the stage for such a move. In a tweet, he said the president has shown remarkable restraint, but may decide he needs to take further action to end Iranian enrichment, and that decision ultimately belongs to Trump. This would be a major escalation in the Middle East and could potentially drag the U.S. into a lengthy war, something that Trump and much of his team have long tried to avoid. Lawmakers here in Washington, though, seem to be getting nervous as well. A bipartisan measure is gaining traction on Capitol Hill that would limit Trump's ability to intervene. It would require him to get Congress's approval before engaging in any sort of direct action against Iran. It's unclear, though, whether this resolution will be able to pass, given Republicans' reluctance to stand up to or stand in the way of the president. Tony Waterman, NDTV, Washington.
But that was my colleague Tony getting you the latest from Washington. And with that, it's now time to slip into a short break. We'll be right back. Welcome back. You're watching The World Report with me, Arjun, Samar, Mahendran. All to the biggest news from the world of business this Wednesday. Now, according to reports, Elon Musk's XAI is on track to close on a $5 billion debt raise led by Morgan Stanley, despite tepid investor demand. You has the $5 billion debt sale, which also includes a floating rate term loan, a fixed rate term loan, and secured bonds, will be allocated to investors, in fact, this very day on Wednesday. And well, that's all we have for you on this Wednesday edition of The World Report. Take care and have a wonderful day.